Are you ready, Team 3? Yes, you have 15 minutes. Go ahead.
Welcome back to This Week. I'm your host, George Stephanopoulos. Today, we're taking a hop over the pond to look at the economic state of the Euro area and address slow growth in my ancestral homeland, Greece. Joining me, I have Alexis Tsipras, Prime Minister of Greece, Mario Draghi, President of the European Central Bank, as well as Ariana Huffington and Charles D. Mitropoulos, both prominent Greek-American business people. Mr. Draghi, let's start off with you. Could you please give our viewers a brief overview of the economic state of the Euro area?
Certainly. Let's look at the most important economic indicators. If you look at the graph, GDP growth in the Euro area in Q4 of 2016 was at 0.4%, marking the 7th consecutive quarter of consistently slow growth. For the first time since the 2008 recession, growth in the Euro area actually exceeded that of the US. For all of 2016, the Euro area grew at 1.7%, bolstered by increased consumer and government spending, and is forecasted to grow at 1.6% through 2017.
Growth in the Euro area has been uneven. The smaller economies of Estonia and Slovenia have had the highest quarterly growth, at 1.7% and 1.2% respectively, while Finland and Greece have had much slower growth, with Greece being the only Euro area economy to experience contraction.
While GDP growth is a good sign for the Euro area, there are still many lingering issues that could threaten long-term growth.
I completely agree. Investment spending is still not back to pre-recession levels. Indeed, real gross fixed capital formation is still 13% lower than it was in 2007. The Euro area's banking sector is also plagued with 1 trillion euros in non-performing loans. Italy's banks account for 1/4 of these loans, and in Greece and Cyprus, nearly half of all loans are non-performing.
The value of the euro depreciated 4.4% relative to the dollar over the last year and has fallen to $1.07, just bouncing off the 10-year low of $1.05 in January. What's behind this, Mr. Draghi?
In the aftermath of Brexit, there's been a lot of political instability across Europe, which has manifested itself in greater volatility in financial markets. Years of slow growth, low inflation, and high unemployment have caused an uptick in right-wing populist sentiment across the continent. If Marine Le Pen of the National Front is elected president of France in the next round of voting, she could have France leave the EU, which would cause for the disintegration of the European Union and the common market.
Thank you, Mr. Draghi. Let's turn to inflation and unemployment. How strong is the euro area in these sectors?
Inflation in the first half of 2016 was very low, with 0.2% deflation in February of that year. However, by the beginning of 2017, deflationary fears faded, with a 2% increase in the consumer price index in February of this year. Last month, less pressure from energy prices pushed inflation to 1.5%, which is not as close to the ECB's target of 2% as we'd like it.
As for unemployment, from the third quarter of 2015 to December of 2016, overall employment in the euro area has grown by 1.2%, the fastest rate seen since 2008. Job creation is expected to continue to benefit from domestic demand-led growth, as well as reasonable wage growth and structural reform.
This has caused a steady decline in unemployment, going from 10.2% in April of 2016 down to 9.5% in February of 2017, and is expected to reach 9.2% by 2018. Despite an increase of refugees entering the euro area, falling unemployment coupled with increased labor force participation rates indicate that they are being successfully integrated into the labor force. When looking at the member states, Greece with an unemployment rate at 23.5% has the biggest unemployment problem by far.
Thank you. Let's move on to discuss other issues specifically with the Greek economy. Back to you, Mr. Tsipras.
Of course, the sovereign debt level is a huge problem. In 2015, public debt was 176.9% of GDP. This has proven to be a huge barrier to tackling Greece's many other issues, as it puts a large burden on public finance. This has helped push Greek government bond yields to over 7%, severely restricting government spending.
I think that only once Greece's economy is growing again can public finance get back on track. Austerity measures are forcing governments to balance budgets with the depleted tax base from years of recession. This is severely limiting the power of fiscal policy to deal with Greece's myriad of other issues.
I completely agree, Mrs. Huffington, and I think that GDP growth is one of these problems. Though the Greek economy saw some improvement throughout 2016, it remains in a deep recession. Between 2007 and 2015, the Greek economy contracted 25%. Anchored poverty, which measures income relative to pre-crisis levels, nearly tripled, reaching a third of the Greek population during the same period. Growth in 2016 has been very unsteady, and in fact, GDP actually contracted 1.4%. As seen on the graph, the economy oscillated between growth and contraction nearly every quarter. Therefore, I think that the IMF's projection of 2.5% growth for 2017 should be viewed with extreme caution, given Greece's history of unpredictably changing results.
I'm particularly worried about inflation. It has fluctuated greatly in the past year, from a low of negative 0.7% in March of 2016 to 1.4% in February of 2017. However, slow GDP growth and high unemployment leave the threat of deflation a possibility. This is worrisome, as a prolonged decrease in prices can lock economies into a recession-causing deflationary cycle.
Indeed, unemployment is also a major problem in Greece, as mentioned earlier by Mr. Tsipras. In January of 2017, the unemployment rate stood at 23.5%, compared to 10% in the early 2000s, and youth unemployment remained at a very high 48%. Though there has been some decline, these rates are still far too high.
Greece is clearly doing very poorly on many fronts, but the real issue is that since the recession, Greece has been experiencing slow economic growth, which I believe is what's causing these lingering problems, such as very high unemployment and low inflation. It's like we're repairing a car, and no matter what we do to grease the wheels or adjust the brakes, the car's just not going anywhere without a real working engine of economic growth. So, what might be behind this slow growth, Ms. Huffington?
We see three key factors responsible for Greece's sluggish growth: its failing tax system, high rates of anchored poverty, and a lack of investment.
I'd like to focus on Greece's system of taxation, which is complex and onerous and has hurt business and incentivized tax evasion. Taxes imposed in austerity agreements in 2015, such as an 18% tax on tourism, as well as on shipping and energy, have directly hurt some of Greece's prized industries.
Given Greece's limited means of enforcement, a lack of autonomy for the taxation division within the Greek Ministry of Finance, and the extremely high ratio of citizens to full-time tax administration staff, approximately 20% of the Greek economy is estimated to be in the shadows of tax law. Moreover, Greek tax authorities are far behind their European counterparts in tax collection technology.
We must also remember that extensive poverty in Greece has crippled consumer spending, a direct component of GDP and thus slowed growth. The anchored poverty rate has tripled since 2007, and nearly 15% of Greeks live in extreme poverty. This is 7 times the pre-recession rate of 2.2%, continuing to rise 6 points since 2011.
The female labor force participation rate at 44% trails the euro area average by 6 percentage points. Currently, daycares cost over half the average Greek woman's income. This discourages women from entering the labor force, as many decide to stay home with children instead to avoid the cost. The lack of affordable daycares is another financial burden placed on already struggling Greek families.
I agree. In fact, in a recent survey study comparing policies in industrialized nations, government spending on quality access to daycare had the single biggest effect on increasing women's employment, decreasing the gender pay gap, and increasing the fertility rate, which is particularly important in Greece given the country's declining birth rate due to financial pressures. Let's now pivot to investment spending. How are the Greeks doing there?
Investment is very low, as it is extremely difficult to start a business in Greece. Our country ranks 61st on the World Bank's Ease of Starting a Business Index.
Greece suffers from huge amounts of red tape, especially in the areas of property registration and construction, where getting permits can take double the paperwork and cost of the OECD average. This is significantly reducing investment in key property-based areas like retail, tourism, and shipping.
Furthermore, it is extremely difficult for Greek businesses to get access to financing. Currently, a high rate of non-performing loans, or NPLs, combined with low depositor confidence, has drained our banks of needed money to make loans.
This lack of confidence has led to a decline in bank deposits, with depositors opting to keep their money at home rather than in the banks. This has decreased the supply of loanable funds, pushing the Greek interest rate of borrowing from financial institutions to 5.11%, more than double the euro area average of just 2.31%. This has contributed to slow GDP growth by limiting business expansion.
Thank you. Because I like to end things on a positive note, what are some steps that could be taken to tackle this issue of slow growth?
I'd like to begin. My government's first priority is implementing a guaranteed minimum income this year to help combat poverty. My program will provide up to 200 euros a month to over 1.2 million impoverished Greeks. By doing so, consumer spending will increase drastically as those with the lowest incomes have the highest marginal propensities to consume. Even though this program is calculated to cost 0.5% of Greece's GDP, we are still expected to meet the ESM program's target of a 1.75% GDP surplus next year.
However, further programs are still needed. More government-subsidized daycare centers should be created and integrated into residential areas, making it easier and more affordable for women to work. With more women in the labor force, families will have a greater income to support themselves and spend in the economy. Our anti-poverty solutions actually surpass Greece's National Plan for Europe 2020, which has the goal of lifting 450,000 Greeks out of the risk of poverty.
But these programs sound awfully expensive. What are some ways the already cash-strapped government could raise revenue without stifling growth?
The abandoned Ellinikon Airport in Athens must be privatized. It is Greece's largest piece of real estate and will bring in an estimated 2 billion euros in revenue. The privatization would create 10,000 short-term and 70,000 long-term jobs due to the new business activity. The privatization would also create much-needed fiscal space for some of our more costly proposals.
I agree, and another way to raise revenue would be to combat rampant tax evasion. If we are able to have more fiscal breathing room in the form of better tax collection, taxes imposed on key industries like shipping and energy could be lifted without violating the terms of a bailout deal.
Greece's tax authority must also be given more independence from other institutions, both to decrease its susceptibility to corruption as well as to emphasize the impartiality of taxation. Providing funding for more personnel and computerization to the Ministry of Finance's taxation division would boost revenue tremendously.
We at the European Central Bank have been strongly considering phasing out the use of the 500 euro note, which is primarily used in the shadow economy. This policy would shrink the size of Greece's shadow economy, as without an effective means of transacting funds, these firms would be forced into more easily taxed digital payments. Furthermore, cash registers should be wired so that all transactions of Greek firms are immediately reported to the Greek Ministry of Finance. This undercuts businesses' tendency to underreport taxable profits. Sweden has implemented a similar system with great success.
These proposals could capture the estimated 11 to 16 billion euros of lost tax revenue each year. With that excess revenue, the government could afford to lower the corporate tax rate in Piraeus, one of the most important ports in all of Europe, from 29% to 10%, the current corporate tax rate in neighboring Bulgaria. This new special economic zone would both encourage foreign direct investment and encourage businesses that already use the port to further invest and expand.
As a way to encourage investment, we propose to decrease the amount of red tape. A one-stop agency can greatly reduce the 13 days average time it takes to start a business in Greece compared to the OECD average of 8.3 days. A pilot program is set to begin in March. Companies will be set up remotely and automatically be registered with Social Security and tax numbers. Greek banks must also begin lending money again. To achieve this, they must remove NPLs from their balance sheets through the creation of a privately, publicly financed asset management company. This bad bank, as it is sometimes called, would purchase and collect on NPLs using private investor funds and government funds, partially financed through the issuance of bonds that the Greek government will guarantee.
A bad bank would not only allow financial institutions to free up capital to start lending again, it would also restore depositor confidence by allowing consumers to better measure the financial health of their institutions.
I think that these solutions targeting tax evasion, poverty, and investment will go a long way towards remedying Greece's many issues. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but I'd like to thank you all for coming on and providing some hope for future growth in Greece. As we say back in Greece, Efcharisto e kalispera. Thank you and good day.
So the first question is about the global economy. The outlook for the global economy has turned more positive recently. How and why might this benefit the rate of GDP growth in the euro area?
Mr. Mitropoulos, why don't you begin?
So, of course, the euro area is an integral part of the global economy. And furthermore, it is very interconnected with the US economy, the Chinese economy, and the economies of almost every other nation around the world. So, a global uptick in the economy actually helps fuel international demand for Europe's many exports.
Just talking about Greece in particular, two of Greece's largest industries are shipping and tourism, both which are heavily dependent on the global economy. If there's more trade going on, we're going to see more demand for Greek shippers. We're also going to see more wealth, so people are going to have more money to be able to come and vacation on Mykonos.
Good. The second question is about inflation. The inflation rate in the euro area has increased steadily in the past year. How and why has the monetary policy of the European Central Bank influenced the inflation rate?
Mr. Tsipras?
So the European Central Bank has been using expansionary monetary policy, and more specifically, in doing a system of quantitative easing to increase the money supply in Europe. And what that does is when the money supply is increased, interest rates are lowered, which increases the amount of borrowing and lending going on in an economy, which increases inflation rates.
Mr. Mitropoulos?
Furthermore, it actually low interest rates actually disincentivize saving, which helps boost consumption and demand in the economy, which has certainly been very helpful for Europe's economy.
You mentioned the very high public debt to GDP ratio at the onset of your presentation. Most of your recommendations focused on increasing the denominator, GDP. I'm wondering what other recommendations, besides the more effective collection of taxes you have, for reducing the denominator debt.
Mr. Draghi?
One of our key solutions is privatizing the Ellinikon Airport in Athens, one of Greece's largest pieces of real estate. We think that this would add a lot of revenue to the government, allow for some more fiscal policy options, but we could also use some of that to curb some of the debt. It's very close to the port of Piraeus, which would also allow for a lot of growth between the port and the airport.
Mr. Mitropoulos?
I would like to add that Greece has a $7 billion debt service payment coming up in June. And actually, something that's come up with the IMF, which is part of the Troika, Greece's creditors, is that they do not want to extend another bailout to Greece unless Europe agrees to reduce Greece's debt load. So we see that Greece, especially with an uptick in populist sentiment around Europe, Greece is in actually a very strong place to negotiate with the European Central Bank and the European Commission to reduce that debt load, on the logic that a lower debt load will allow Greece to regain fiscal footing to be able to be viable long term. And that could come in the form of longer maturities or interest deferrals.
Furthermore, we do see that the Greek government in the last years particularly has taken on extensive reforming their, frankly, disastrous pension system and working to cut back on government safety nets, which are, infamously extensive in Greece.
So I'm glad you mentioned the negotiations with the creditors. I wonder how you think about in the framework of a medium-term plan whether debt relief is actually a necessary condition to improve Greek economy, and in addition, if you go through negotiations and your creditors are not willing to provide relief on debt, is it a reasonable thing at that point to consider whether Greece should leave the monetary union?
Mr. Draghi?
I'd like to address the last part of your question. We would not think in any case it would be a good idea for Greece to leave the monetary union. It enjoys a lot of benefits being part of the euro area, namely that it has access to the European Free Trade Zone, and so it gets to trade a lot of its goods given that it's an export economy, and the common currency allows for a lot more commerce between the nations.
Furthermore, though, we do see that it's a huge amount of debt Greece has, but we feel that potentially the creditors and the Greek government could come to sort of an understanding, because at the end of the day, the creditors want some money back rather than none. So leaving the European Union would probably also entail defaulting on all that debt, which would mean the creditors lose out completely. So if the Greeks were to make it very clear that implementing a lot of the solutions we, for example, mentioned, that they are serious about reining in public spending and about boosting long-term successful growth, we do believe that the creditors would be willing to come to an agreement and say, okay, listen, you're doing your best, we can probably help you out a little bit. Because again, 80 cents on the dollar or 60 cents on the dollar is going to be, at the end of it, better than nothing. Ms. Hovington.
To address the first part of your question, we see that Greece's big debt problem definitely needs to be resolved with Greece and the Troika, because austerity measures that have been put in place have really been hurting Greece's economy, such as Mr. Mitropoulos mentioned, an 18% tax on tourism, which is one of Greece's biggest industries. So that's really been hurting Greece, and we really want to see them come to a resolution on the debt.
Mr. Mitropoulos, why don't you talk
I'd just like quickly to add that, so Greece has actually had a 4.2% budget surplus, excluding debt payments. So actually, if you take out of the equation all of this debt, Greece is actually extremely fiscal responsible currently. So we view that removing some of this debt load, and obviously Greece does need to pay back some of it, is necessary, because Greece really has done a lot, and with our solutions could do a lot more, but the size of their debt load is simply so large that even with a 4% budget surplus, they can't pay back this 7 billion euros that's expected in June.
Regarding the bad bank that you want to set up, can you say a little bit more about how the risk will be borne? In other words, who will have to recognize the potential losses on those NPLs? And in particular, how would you incentivize private investors to join up with you in this public-private partnership?
Mr. Tsipras.
So this bank is going to be financed through the selling of both stock and bonds, and we're thinking that for bondholders, the government could back up bonds for this bad bank so that there isn't as much of a risk, so we could get more people buying bonds to finance this bank. And for stockholders, we're thinking of providing a special dividend once the asset management company reaches a certain profit margin, so that stockholders get their money back faster and end up with an even larger profit, so they have a bigger incentive to buy equity and buy shares of this company.
Ms. Hovington.
So ideally, we're hoping that bondholders and stockholders will provide most of the money needed for this bad bank, but in the event that maybe they don't provide enough, the Greek government might have to spend a little bit, but it's definitely much less than bailing out all the loans.
Furthermore, we see that it's not just an issue of collection, but it's more an issue of prioritization. So many banks in Greece just aren't able to collect on the loans because physically collecting on the loans takes so long in Greece, where the litigation process is notoriously dragged out. So we feel that this bad bank will not only just take these bad loans off of banks' balance sheets, but that it will also be able to collect on more of them than a regular commercial bank would be able to, because it has that means of prioritization.
Okay, so I'm wondering about Mario Draghi sitting there. So you talked about your concerns about Greece's deflation, but Greece is a very small part of the euro. What's it, 3%? Less than 3%? 2% now. It keeps getting smaller. So why does Mario Draghi care about Greece? What does Mario Draghi kind of do for Greece in terms of the ECB policy setting?
Mr. Draghi, why don't you answer that?
Sure thing. So Greece is an important part of the euro area, and we've been seeing a lot of economic challenges even beyond the low inflation rate in Greece. Furthermore, I would say that Greece is indicative of a lot of the trends that we've been seeing in Southern Europe. And as the head of the ECB, I have to think about all regions and all countries within the euro area in making policy. So when I'm looking at Greece, I see it as both a situation in and of itself in how fragile it's been, but also a part of a larger group of countries that need our attention.
Mr. Tsipras, why don't you add?
The ECB would also like Greece to be able to eventually pay back their debts, and if Greece falls into a deflationary cycle, that could possibly prolong the recession even more, making it even more implausible that Greece will be able to pay back all the debts from their successive bailouts with Troika.
Mr. Mitropoulos?
Finally, if you look at the current political context in Europe, with recent Brexit and the risk with Marine Le Pen's win on May 7th, of a lot of countries that frankly are looking at the European deal and of federalism and saying, we want out. And so, especially in the current climate, Mr. Draghi looking at the economies of Greece, of Italy, that are facing these huge challenges and saying, Europe cares, and we're in this together. I think that's really important because if you start to see countries like Greece that think, the European Union's out to get them when it comes to this debt collection, Greece leaves the euro. I mean, that's something that could be really catastrophic for the entire federal system.
Time's up. Thank you very much.